theory of practice, and the last thing we do before the exam will be nobody. I just I'll give you an example when we get that. But I got to do one more theory. Nobody is very, very important in terms of the development of the socialist. As you'll see, Mr. Nobel. Okay. Okay. Here's what I want to do. Okay. Although I've done what I'm going to do today, I've actually done before, but I'm going to do it again. Okay. So, try to do a better job. Number one. Number two, connect it to your reading. What I've asked you to do. And then third, once again, explain why this is a critique of orthodox Marxism as revealed in these different theories that we've studied so far. Marx, so I'm going to begin with Mr. Marx. He's the seminal thinker for all these people. Mr. Marx, like many social theorists, like the people, the courses that you're taking here at the university, they ask many questions, one of which is, as social theorists, what is life? What is social life? And the word used in Marx's day was, what is materialism? What is reality? What is the hell going around with us? And here's how Marx theorized it. For him, society was comprised of literally an infinite set of what he called processes, or if you want, parts of life. Now, he did not do the next step. I'm going to do it because it makes it easier for me to do. You can divide this complexity in a variety of different ways. I'm going to divide it in the following way. I'm comfortable with this. It's not terribly different in terms of how he wrote his stuff, but he didn't actually make this kind of taxonomy. Here it is. Life is comprised of economic processes or parts. They have to do, and I'm repeating now what we did a long time ago, it's okay, production and dissemination of wealth. In the broadest terms, that's what economics is concerned with. The production of wealth and its distribution. How is the distributed society? Under economic processes, Marx makes a breakthrough, which is he invents a new economic process called class exploitation. That's different than the economists before him and after him. That's why all these writers are so taken with this idea of what is class exploitation. I understand from last time, they differ on their interpretations. But the old man, Marx, makes his breakthrough with this idea of class exploitation, and in particular, to narrow it even more, he makes class exploitation, to understand it, a difference between the use and exchange value of labor power. Get right to it. And that's in his great economic contribution of Capital, Volume 1, in which he explains how the difference between the use and exchange value of labor power, that which we did last time, is the source of class exploitation. But life cannot be reduced to economics alone. You know that. There are also all kinds of political processes which occur. Parts of life. There's the ordering of human behavior. It's not just the production and the distribution of wealth, but it's also the production and distribution of our rules and laws that shape who we are and what we do and what we don't do in the case of laws. But you all know when you're driving down the road, you stop at a red light. 99.9% of the time, there's no cop there. We follow that rule, despite the fact there's no authority. when you're dancing with someone, there are particular rules that you obey. I remember that when it was taught to me when I was like 12 years old. It's still cemented in my head, just like not running a red light. If you steal, you go to jail. You don't cheat on your exams. Otherwise, you run the risk of not graduating if you get caught. You can't tell me that these rules are less or more important than economics. If you don't produce wealth, you die. If you run a red light, get caught, you go to jail. If you hit somebody, you'll be arrested. Wow. It's worth examining. Courses on economics, courses on political science. Is that all? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. There's also the cultural aspects of life. Or if you want, cultural processes. What is that? Well, that's got to do with everything concerned with the production and dissemination of meanings, plural. Like what? Music. Every single one of you, my guess is, the first thing you do when you get up in the morning is you listen to music all day. Except for this class, you don't. I'm kidding. Music, which is very more important to you than actually to me. Music has taken on a whole new meaning in life. With these iPods and all that stuff. Is that all? Of course not. Television, movies, your classes, your professors, what they're teaching, your reading, you're dealing with and struggling with this wonderful world, difficult world of ideas, their production and dissemination. If you don't think, you ain't going to be alive. You won't. If you don't follow the laws, you're going to have a problem. If you don't get a job, you're going to have a problem. There's no question that culture is not more or less important than all these other things. It's just another part of our lives. And then finally, there are all the wonderful natural things that occur, the biological and chemical and blah, 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 that you study over the natural sciences. I don't know if I mentioned it or not. You go over there, you study this thing, this lectern is made up of particles. It's moving around. You learn you can turn mass into energy. You learn all these wonderful things about the physical universe, including your own body. So could you reduce life to economics and politics and culture? That would be silly, because you've got all of nature occurring too. So that's the taxonomy. That encompasses everything. Politics, nature, and under each one of these broad categories is really an infinite set. Under economics, there's production and distribution of wealth, but then there are markets, then there are the class processes that I've taught you, there are prices, there are incomes, there are business cycles, and then it goes on and on. Then the question becomes, okay, then what's society? How do you theorize this? Well, society then is the coming together, the site of all of these different processes. What a society is the coming together of politics, economics, culture, and nature. The university system in the United States, which is modeled after Germany, that's where it comes from. Germans came up with it. It's really an idea, in the broadest sense, it's an idea, the university, to get at what a society is. So you get your natural sciences, your humanities, your social sciences, it's an attempt to get you exposed to all of these different parts. Why? Because you're going to participate in them. You already are, and for the rest of your life, you'll participate in all these processes, and you're better off knowing it. Otherwise, if you don't know, you're going to get run over by a large bus. So you may as well know how life impacts you and how you impact life. The best you can. You'll be grappling with this all your life. Marx then theorizes the world. Okay? There's a complexity. What it is the site of all of these different economic, political, and cultural processes. But the man was a student of the dialectic. Dialectic was first played with by the Greek philosophers. A few thousand years later, this man by the name of Hegel, a German philosopher, worked on this, and Marx was a student, not literally, he was a follower, a reader of Mr. Hegel. So Marx comes up with this, he works on this philosophical idea of the dialectic. And what is the dialectic? The dialectic is a way of connecting these different processes. It's a causal logic. That's really what it is. It's that which you've already read in Mr. Engels, when he talks about the dialectic and he talks about Hegel. Because it was very influenced, Mr. Hegel, to Hegel and to Marx. So it's a kind of a glue to connect these things together. Connect what together? Politics, economics, culture, and nature. That's why Marx was all his life concerned with the dialectic. Now I'm going to use a modern word for this dialectic. Okay? This word was invented, the word I'm going to use was invented by, not an economist, but by a psychologist. His name was, long dead, Freud. Freud came up with a word called overdetermination from his theory of dreams. And that's the word I'm going to use. And it's a theory of causation, as Mr. Freud developed it. He wanted to know, when he did that, because I'm going to explain to you if you haven't already had this, he wanted to know how our dreams are an insight into our behavior. There's another language that goes on. There's the conscious language, right? And there's an unconscious language, which is revealed in our dreams. How does that other language, the unconscious, help to shape our conscious language, our behavior to one another? The world of dreams overdetermine us. And what we do in life overdetermine our dreams. They complexly shape one another. With that idea, let's go back. We can say then that a society is the result of economics. That's one of the things that helps to cause society. But it's also caused not just by economics, I'm going back to what we did, by politics as well. But it's not just politics, it's also by culture. And of course, by nature too. So society, right now, is the result. It's the site. It's the location of these different determinations. And don't forget, under each of these, there's an infinite set. Okay, I'm just, summarizing. Hence, you can say now that society, which is in there, is a site of an infinity of processes, political, economic, cultural, natural. That's a physical one. My coffee. So, the word overdetermination for Mr. Freud is not what we're doing here. The prefix over is a poetic way of trying to get across the infinity of processes which are shaping, which are literally constituting, creating a society. Now, you could play this game, it would be fascinating for any individual, because this is the logic. This says that you and I, we are complex sites of what? Of determinations emanating from nature, from genes, our mummies and daddies, grandparents, and relatives we don't even know, going back hundreds, thousands of years. Nature, for sure, shapes the way we look, the way we talk, the way we act, our height, our weight. Our physical being is shaped by nature. Would you reduce yourselves to biology and physics? Of course not. You're also shaped by the economy. It's only in part why you get Harvard University. You get a better life, a better job by being here. So your ideas, your actions are shaped not just by your genes and so forth, but also by the economy and all those forces out there which are affecting you. Would you reduce it to these two? Of course not. You're also affected by all the rules of society, including the rules of your parents, which complexly shape you. And of course, by culture, your music, the courses that you take. So you are a site of all of these different determinations, different causes. You're overdetermined, just like the societies, and just like everything else. So this logic that I just gave you has been deployed in a variety of different disciplines. Linguistic theory, social theory, psychological theory, personal theory, in terms of trying to understand who you are. Okay? So society is the site of these determinations, but then society also impacts everything that's determining it. In other words, society also, in here, the result, this site, I'll write it in, society, which is the result of these determinations, also shapes the economy. The rules, the ideas, all that stuff feeds back to shape the production and dissemination of wealth. Like what? Well, the laws say people have the freedom to buy and sell labor power. That shapes the economy. So, it's not just that the economy shapes what society is, society shapes the economy, politics, culture, nature. But let's not stop. What's something that's interesting nowadays that people are really concerned with, courses, is how the economy affects nature. Right? People claim that what's happening in the environment is being affected by how we produce wealth, how we distribute wealth. So people are worried about environmental damage because of the economy. That's a big concern. And then, of course, if it affects nature, it affects everything, including the society, how we think, the law, new laws that we pass. Look at the blackboard. That's a mess. So, the idea that Marx had was what society is chaotic. It's a mess. So the notion of overdetermination, that idea results in the kind of insight, you can see this when it's goes with psychology, and the kind of insight that the result of all of this are individuals that are being, and societies that are being pushed and pulled in different directions by these infinite set of forces. And there's no freaking way, unless you're a god, you could figure them all out. We're not gods. So the forces, the society is being pushed and pulled in different directions by the economics, by nature, culture. It's a mess. Just like you and me. It's an illusion that we have control over our lives. It's very therapeutic to understand you don't. I'll reveal something to you. One of the problems I have in life, my wife continually tells me, my therapist, I'm not in control. Right? Because of my mother, the way she brought me up, she was always controlling. But I'm not. You aren't either. It's impossible to control infinite. You can't do that if you're a human being. Right? Next step. When Marx confronts this, when anyone confronts this overdetermined totality, when you confront it, there's two things you can do. You can run away because it's really scary. Or, the running away is scary, that's a Woody Allen movie. That's what's funny. Or you can begin to theorize it, to try and explain it. The mess. And here's what people do. It's the best they can do. They say, okay, I'm going to make sense of this mess from the perspective of one, or maybe two, yes, but typically one of these processes. Notice how arbitrary this is. People literally pick and choose a particular process to begin to make sense of. Now, I'm going to use up the language. To begin to make sense of. to bring order to the mess. See, what theory does, it brings order to this chaos. That's the power of theory, and of course it's the weakness of theory because you're always focusing on one of these processes. So, what a theorist does, whether it be when you're theorizing how to make, UMass salad or fix a car or society, you're picking one or two of these processes to try and bring an order. And this order is understanding. That's what order means. It's an understanding of the mess, of the chaos. Marx picks, in economics, he picks just one process. He picks the class process, which he himself invents, this division between necessary and surplus labor. Everybody labors to produce wealth so that they can survive, but then Marx goes one more step. He says, I'm going to break that labor into two parts. The necessary labor is the quantum of labor to produce wealth, to sustain the laborers. But I think, he claims, that in societies, they do labor, and above that, they do a surplus labor. I'm going to come back to it again. So that's his invention. But what's he done? He's making sense of this totality, this infinite set, from the class process. He picks one. And in so doing, he does bring an order. Because then he's got, infinity minus 1. Because this is the class one, so he's got everything else, everything other than class, not class, which is non-class. Understand? So the entry point is it's a way to begin your theorizing. And you can distinguish amongst different theorists by their entry point that they choose. They choose. What does Mr. Bernstein choose? This is what old man Marx chooses. Marx, class as the organization of surplus. What does Mr. Bernstein choose? Where are you, man?
I was going to say communism.
Don't say it, I was going to say. Just say it. Communism? That's good. That's not what I had in mind. That's perfectly out. Okay, can you narrow it a bit? But that's good. That's a good answer.
I have my notes out there.
Reform. Good. Humanism, reform. He chooses politics. He chooses the striving of workers to make a better life for themselves through parliamentary democracy. That's his humanist. What does what do Engels, Kautsky, what do they choose as an entry point? I understand we're going back, but the exam is coming up, so it's useful. Yeah, man. Good for you. So, Bernstein, Engels, Kautsky, property ownership. By the way, just got an idea. Does property belong to the realm of economics or politics?
Economics. It's key to the production process.
That's what it is. Just the ownership of property. Yeah, I understand this. It's key to lots of stuff in life. Why?
Because that determines if you're allowed to have property, or if you
Okay. So if I follow that answer, I think I agree with you. Okay? So the ownership of property is a right. Right comes under the heading of power. So we're given the right to privately own property in the United States as codified in the U.S. Constitution. So, right. Wait a second now. If that belongs to politics, then how the hell did Engels claim that it's economics? You could write a new book on this. There's a problem in this literature. Now that just occurred to me. You could attack Mr. Engels. He says this is economics. You just told me it's politics. Whichever it is, I understand I did some of it provoking you. Just let me finish the point and I'll get your questions. Whichever it is, Bernstein approaches the chaos from the perspective of politics. Marx approaches it, that's his entry point, different entry point from that of surplus labor. Engels and Kautsky, whatever it is, economics or politics, do it in terms of you've got three different theories here. Three different theories of how to go about understanding society and what to do about society, whether it be revolution or reform. Why? Because they have different ways of approaching it. Suppose I were a religious person. I were a preacher or a minister. You may think I am, but I'm not. I would then have a different entry point. For me, it would be God. If you're a natural scientist, it would be nature, particles, or whatever. Mathematics. These are all the wonderful, really extraordinary, wonderful ways that people begin to try to make sense of this chaos. Okay, now stop. I'll get your questions. Go ahead. Way back there first. My problem is I kept talking, so I cut you off, and now you forgot the questions that you were going to ask. I had 3 hands. Yeah, man.
By his definition of it being under politics, that would put all of economics under politics, because buying and selling anything is a right of politics.
Good. So what we're doing here is 2 things. Very nicely done. We are trying to see, when people do analysis of anything, when they do an analysis of a body, or economics, or politics, or when your MD does an analysis of you, you have to make distinctions. You have to make analytical distinctions. Otherwise, you're dealing with oatmeal. Everything looks the same. So what theoreticians do is try to make distinctions amongst economics, or politics, and so forth, etc. Analytical distinctions, in order to say something about anything. So everybody is trying to, that's one step. Second step, which is what you said, is once you make the analytical distinctions, which you have to do to theorize, then the question is, how do those analytical distinctions amongst these processes, politics, economics, shape one another? There's 2 different steps. The first step is, in order to analyze, to explain how and why something happens, to theorize it, okay, you have to have an entry point. You have to make an entry point has to make a distinction. That's what it does. I just did that. An entry point is the distinction between this and everything else. Then you ask the next question, which is, okay, what's the relationship, the connection between my entry point, whatever it is, and everything else? Understand those 2 different steps. Okay, so in the literature that you have confronted, and my guess is what real course you've taken, there are 2 answers to this question of how they're connected. Everybody makes distinctions, otherwise you couldn't theorize. But the second step is 2 answers. First answer, my entry point causes everything else. It's not just it's my choice of where I begin, but also is the ultimate cause of everything. The second answer is no. Everything is both cause and effect. So the first answer is called determinist reasoning or deduction. You deduce everything from something. The second step rejects that kind of reasoning and says, no, everything overdetermines everything else. Everything is both cause and effect. That's what you're grappling with in your reading. What Mr. Engels grappled with in that section 2, I think. He was struggling. He wanted, on one hand, the Hegelian dialectic, which he read in Marx and discussed with Marx when Marx was alive, advice. So he wanted that dialectics, that everything is both cause and effect. Class shapes non-class, and non-class shapes class. But then he also wanted the power of deduction, which is, I got my hands on the ultimate cause of everything, which is economics, or what he thought to be economics. And that's a struggle, not only within the Marxian tradition, but within socialism. And this is, by the way, it's a struggle in everything. Determinist reasoning is called, it's used a different word nowadays in your other courses, that's called a form of modernism. Overdetermination is a form of what is called postmodernism. So whether it be in art or architecture or what we're doing here in the course, it connects to those other things. But I'm not going to do that stuff. That's for your other courses. But you can see it has also implications for other kinds of forms of reasoning. All right. Okay, that's the next step. Now I want to get back to what we did. So this is the broad approach. So here Marx chooses the organization of surplus. That's a different entry point than these other theorists have chosen. I'm not arguing that one is better or worse than the other. They're just different ways of beginning to make sense of society. By the way, you can ask the question. If I shouldn't ask it, I'll ask it anyway. Why did Marx choose this? He invented it. Why did he do that? Why didn't he just take one of the others? Why did he take? Yeah, man.
Maybe he thought that one had the most weight to it, so that going that way you can affect the most things and have the most impact by changing one thing.
Why? I don't disagree with you. But why did he think that was so important to introduce it to social theory? The answer to the question rests in the theory of causation I just showed you. Deploy the dialectic or overdetermination to answer that question. Explain Marx's choice, his invention, his choice of an entry point. How do you do that? If everything is overdetermined, that's who is overdetermined. So the answer to why Marx chose the organization of surplus is partly a result of his readings with other theories, Smith, Ricardo, French socialists, and so forth. His understanding of economics. He finds this idea of surplus, which he grappled with for 35, 40, 50, 40 years, not to be present in the work of Adam Smith and Ricardo. He thought it had something to do with the misery of the day. And hence he began to work to try and explain what the hell's the source of this profit in capitalism. Because I can't find an adequate answer in Smith and Ricardo, the great economists of the day, which he read carefully. He couldn't find it in the answer of those utopian socialists that you read. They didn't mention any of this surplus. It was also muchly shaped by the economic events of the day. People wanted to know, why are there business cycles? What the hell is capital and capitalists? So Marx began to work, like any theorist, to try and respond to these determinations which are shaping them. The stuff that he read, I just told you, he studied the Greek philosophers who worked on the dialectic. He studied Hegel, hence they helped to shape his notion of causation. He studied the French socialists, he studied economists. It helped to shape his coming up with this organization of surplus. That's his idea. Did his father and mother have an influence on him? That's a stupid question. Did your father and mother have an influence on you? Of course they did. Did his marriage have an influence? Of course it did. He was poor all his life. Did that shape? Of course it did. His friendship with Engels, did that shape him? Of course. So he himself is a site of a variety of different political, economic, cultural, and natural processes, and they come together, that would be a whole course, they come together and produce an entry point. Just like they did in Bernstein and Engels and Nova that you're going to read, every one of these theories. Their choice is never simple, just like your choices are not simple. You all know that, I think. Your choices are socially and physically contrived. And that'll help you the next time you make this choice. I did what I did because of, oh my goodness, a whole bunch of different processes propelled me in that particular direction. So Marx's choice, his entry point, is itself overdetermined, and in part, I'm going to go back to what you said, he wants to make people aware of class by putting that idea into people's heads. Why? Because then that's what a theory does. Okay? This is what this entry point does. It makes people begin to think and see something which is going on in their lives, including Marx's life, which they don't see and they don't think before the theorist does that. That's the power of the theory, whether it be in physics or in Marxism or in chemistry. It doesn't make any difference. What those people do, while they're worth studying, is they concoct an entry point, an idea. And they put the idea into the discourse of the day to try and persuade individuals to see something they don't now see, to think something they don't now see. With what result? The dropping of the A-bomb during World War II to end the war. The invention of polio vaccine. The iPhone. Class is the organization of surplus. God. These are all powerful ideas, entry points, which enable us to begin to understand this chaos around us. So Marx chooses this surplus labor, and hence you can begin to differentiate his knowledge of capitalism and socialism and communism from the others because of the different entry point. I'm going to make use of this now for the next step. But before I do that, questions, comments, questions. Okay, good. I hope. So Marx has got this entry point. He grapples. It takes him a long time to come up with this. And it's the production and appropriation of surplus. So it's this surplus labor. And I call this, in your reading from last time, this is the fundamental class process, let's say, in capitalism. Very first, workers go to work in the United States, they do surplus labor. They participate in this class process. And in capitalism, they don't get the yield of the surplus. The capitalists get it. It's inside. So something is going on in capitalism that people aren't aware of. You are, but other people are not aware of because they have not taken 373. They haven't read Capital. So Marx, like any theorist, wants people to be aware of this fundamental class process that's occurring. The result is the surplus, okay, in the society. So that's the class part. That's one part of society, one process, class. I just told you this is an infinite set going on. There's lots of stuff going on. All he's done now is isolate one of them. So he asks the question, okay, this seems to be important, this is my entry point and so forth. How does class exist and how does it get reproduced over time? That is, how does a surplus exist and how does it get reproduced over time? Well, to answer that question, he has to connect the fundamental class process to all the non-fundamental class processes that go on in society, as we just did. And he uses the dialectic to do that, or this modeling of overdetermination. The individuals who get the surplus, let's say that I'm doing this for us, the board of directors, the corporations, the capitalists, they gotta take that surplus and they have to get rid of it. Not in a random way. They gotta distribute the surplus in order to secure the non-class processes because those help the cause class. They overdetermine class. Just like anything else in society. Just like the entire society, like you and me, whatever it is. The class process is a complex result of these non-class processes. So how does the board do that? The board takes a cut of the surplus and gives it to individuals managers who provide some of those non-class processes which enable the surplus to exist. So the surplus causes this, because that's where you get the payment, subsumed class payment to the managers, to provide their what? Politics, economics, culture, and natural processes that they produce in order to cause class, which causes this, which causes. So they cause each other. Not one is the ultimate cause of the other. They cause each other. That's his glue. Yeah, man.
What was SSCP again, please?
This is the, and you're reading now, subsumed class payment. So you got the surplus, then it has to be distributed. That's the subsumed class process. The fundamental class process. It's not enough to just get the surplus. Then you have to distribute the surplus to all the subsumed classes, the managers, who provide the non-class processes, the conditions of existence on the left-hand side of the equation. So in volume 1, Marx says, the production and receipt of surplus is a condition of existence of all of these processes, and these processes are a condition of existence of the production and appropriation of surplus. So volume 1 of capital is on this. Volumes 2 and 3 of capital is on this. And the synthesis, you bring the whole freaking thing together, you get this whole theory of society. The synthesis of class, production, distribution, and non-class is his discourse, his ideas, set to make class and non-class sense of society and how they interact with one another. A portion gets distributed to owners in the form of dividends. For what? To get the non-class process of access to own means of production. Because the owners own, somebody asked me after the class, owners do not get the surplus. The owners of General Electric don't get the profits. The board of directors gets the profit, and they may or may not give a cut of the profits in the form of a dividend to the owners. If you have your own business, if you own your own little business, then you are on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side. That's what private ownership of a business means. But most corporations, in fact, all large corporations, there's a difference here between people who are on the left-hand side and people who are on the right. They don't have to be the same people. Now, just one second. Marx confronted this in his day, because in his day it was mostly owner-operated capitalism. We didn't have the large corporations that we have today. So he writes in one little chapter in volume 3 when he writes about this stuff. He says, things are changing. Now, the same individual no longer is getting the profit of the owners. I can see, says he, there is a new class arising in society. A new class. It's not just the industrial capitalists who get the profits, but a new class of owners arising, and there's a separation between the receipt of the profit and the ownership of capital. Very fascinating. But he dies before he does anything with that. Yes, right.
What about the instance, for example, of people who are the majority stakeholders, like, for example, Gates and Microsoft, who sat on the board of directors but was also the owner?
Absolutely. So we also have nowadays, we have individuals, that continues like it was in Marx's day, even the large corporations. We can have at any one moment individuals who, same individual participates in two different processes. Remember, they're processes. You can't reduce an individual to a process. So an individual can participate in multiple processes, that's what we do, and hence you participate in the fundamental class process, you receive the surplus, but you're also, on the right-hand side, you own shares of stock. Do you have to own a majority of the shares?
No.
No. See, as stock ownership gets dispersed, so there are millions of shares, you can have enormous power in the corporation if you own a minority of the shares, because they're dispersed. That's that brilliant means that I mentioned to you last time. They work on it. But other people, lots of people work on it. So what has happened in the United States, this is when Bernstein comes along and he sees the dispersion of ownership. And he thinks, oh my goodness, capitalism is accomplishing socialism. His entry point is this. He makes that an essential cause. The right-hand side. That's not Marx. Marx is working on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. A portion of the surplus gets distributed to the state in the form of taxes, state officials. State officials get a cut of the surplus. They levy taxes on the boards of directors of the corporations. And they supply all kinds of non-class economic, political, and cultural and natural processes to the corporation, such that the corporation can appropriate the surplus. Tell me a downside. If you're a capitalist, you're on the left-hand side of the equation. Tell me a downside of what might be what might be a consequence of what's occurring now in Wisconsin. Analyze that for me using this equation. Go ahead, sir.
So
I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
if you have a larger surplus, or if you have no surplus, let's say in Wisconsin, you're not going to have anyone paying the managers, and the managers aren't going to be distributing money into the larger society.
Right. What I meant was specifically was the governor wants to cut what he provides. What the governor wants to cut taxes. So this payment to the state gets reduced. This is the negative, big negative. I want you to. That's what he wants. That's what he's doing. Okay. So tell me a possible bad thing that might happen to capitalism in Wisconsin by this right-wing governor trying to help capitalism in Wisconsin. We're out. The other guy had. Yeah, man.
I was just gonna say, if the state's actually getting less money, then on the right side's gonna not equal the left side anymore.
Not so much equal. Okay, you're going to cut this. How does that threaten capitalism from what I just taught you? That's the question. Okay.
You don't have the money to secure the conditions of existence.
That's
of
the answer.
infrastructure.
Yes, sir. There's no logic. Let me do it. I'm not clear enough, so I want you to get this. Okay? Not just for the exam. I want you to get this for the rest of your life. The individuals and institutions on the right-hand side of the blackboard, they secure, listen to the language, the conditions of existence for the left-hand side of surplus value. That's the dialectic. If this doesn't exist, and if it's not reproduced over time, there will be no profits for private capitalism. The existence, the functioning, the success of capitalism in Wisconsin and other states depends upon managers, for sure. It depends upon owners, for sure. But it also depends upon the state, for sure. If the kids in Wisconsin are not educated, my goodness, that's going to threaten that state. If there's law, if there's no law or order, if they fire cops, that's going to threaten that state. If people can't walk down a sidewalk because other people are lying there dead because they're not on welfare, that's going to threaten the state. If the workers in education, police, fire, etc., are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's going to threaten the survival of that state. It would be like akin to cutting the salaries and budgets of managers, because they supply the conditions of existence. I just taught you, one condition is not more or less important than the other. Politics, culture, economics, they're all in their different way give rise to determinations which cause that as its site. And you need the profits to secure the conditions of existence. They shape one another. Bankers. Look, it's quite possible, it's quite possible to have, at any one moment, the following. Inequality. The board of directors faces a crisis, which, well, the demands on the surplus exceed the surplus. So the board of directors, 22 people roughly, have a crisis on their hands, which is demand, surplus, rate, and supply. That's a crisis. But they need everybody on the right-hand side. It's the conditions of existence. So how do they solve this? This is a crisis. This is not solved. They go out of business. They socially die. Yes, sir.
Finances.
So one of the ways they can do this is to add debt. To make it equality. But the problem with debt is you've got to repay the debt and interest the bankers. And then you've got another possibility, which is of a new inequality, because you've added something to the right hand side. So in the world of business, people get paid a small fortune, and some of you get paid this, and I'm very happy for you. You will analyze, right? That's what we talked about. You're going to analyze when you graduate, you'll have the job. Does the debt we borrowed increase the surplus, the profit of the corporation, sufficiently so that we no longer have that crisis? So you're going to be comparing the interest rate on the debt with the productivity of the debt. And you're going to get paid 2, 3, 400 grand a year for doing it. Isn't that exciting? Sounds good. You can buy several new cities. That's what CFOs do, Chief Financial Officers. Where do they sit? Right there. That's an important position of assistance. Okay. One more and I'll stop. I want to get them all in. Landlords. A portion of the surplus has to be given to the landlords. Why? Because they own land upon which sit the office and the factories. They get rents. So landlords get a rent, a cut of the surplus for providing access to privately owned properties. It was an American many decades ago, during colonial times. His name was Henry George. People won't know why. He thought the problem in society emanated from landlords. He wanted to get rid of landlords. He was a radical man at the time. He wanted everybody to own the land. He thought the land ate up all the surplus, and hence the capitalists wouldn't have anything left to grow. So he was not a Marxist, he was not a socialist. What he wanted to abolish was private ownership of land, tax it away. That was his thinking point. That was his theorization of American society. Okay? Now, let me go back now and see if I can connect all this together. These theorists are all, as I told you from last time and from your reading, all the theorists that we have confronted so far want a classless society. They want to abolish exploitation, they want a better society, blah, 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 blah. They have different, however, they theorize class in different ways. Some of them theorize class from the perspective of property ownership. Mr. Engels, Mr. Kautsky, to a degree, Mr. Bernstein, Mr. Lenin. Some of them theorize class in terms of power. That's their entry point. Mr. Bernstein, Mr. Trotsky, as I've mentioned to you before. Mr. Novak, that's coming down the pipe when we study it. Mr. Bettelheim, a very famous theorist when we study it. Marx theorized class in a different way than them, in a different entry point. He theorized it in terms of the organization of surplus. Now let's look at this equation. It's quite possible to have a revolution over ownership, to radically change the ownership of property, just as Engels and Kautsky, and to a degree Bernstein wanted, and Lenin, without radically altering who gets the surplus. You've got a distinction between left and right-hand sides of the equation. These gentlemen, okay, they go after various parts of the right-hand side. They think that a revolution over ownership, collective ownership in this equation, will automatically take care of the left-hand side of the equation. There's no necessity for that whatsoever. That's the history of the former Soviet Union, the history of China, of Cuba, of Yugoslavia, of Poland, of Czechoslovakia, East Germany, North Vietnam, Albania. That's called determinism, in which you go after one thing is you think it's the ultimate cause. So if I have a revolution over ownership, I'm going to change everything automatically. There's no necessity for that whatsoever. It will alter everything, because that's overdetermination. But there's no necessity that it completely destroys the capitalist appropriation of surplus, production and appropriation. Mr. Bernstein comes along. He says, I want a revolution over power. I want the workers on the left-hand side to become, let's say, the managers of their lives. I did that one. I want the workers, not just, they already have this ownership, but I want them via the state, put pressure on the state, democracy, voting, and I want them to become controllers of their labor time, controller of their work conditions. I want them to give them the power inside the corporations, not just outside. There's no necessity that a revolution over power will be a revolution over class. For him it is, because he understands class in a proper power way. But there's no necessity for, when you give power to workers, that it'll automatically and intrinsically mean that they appropriate the surplus they produce. That's called, like I said, Japanese capitalism. There, after World War II, they developed a kind of capitalism in which enormous power was given to the workers on the floors of the factories and offices to make the workers happier, more productive, so they produce more surplus. That wasn't the end of capitalism. That was the dawn of a new kind of capitalism in which workers had a lot of control. Okay, so the consequence of these different notions of class is what you go after, one of the consequences is what you go after in terms of the left and right-hand side of the equations. By the way, I'm going to be fair to this. Suppose a follower of Marx goes after the left-hand side of the equation. And what I did for you last time, that means that workers have to be in a position to get the use value of their own labor power. They have to be in the position of literally being on the board of directors and receiving the surplus that they produce. But if that revolution had happened, such as that's communism, if the workers were in the position of getting the surplus they produce as their collectivity, does that necessarily mean revolutions on the right-hand side such that there is democracy? No. The revolution is not finished. You can't deduce that everyone has power over their lives from everybody just being a producer and receiver and a distributor of the surplus. So it's a radical, very radical idea, this notion of overdetermination, this notion of class. In a sense, the revolutions never get finished. There's no question that in the United States we have enjoyed and have had a dramatic and sustained revolution over power. I cannot think, I've lived in a few countries, and I cannot think of any society in which the revolution over power has gone as far as it has in the United States. I mean, it's mind-boggling the personal freedoms that we enjoy in the United States. It's just mind-boggling. And compared to, just a few decades ago, I'm not saying it's finished. There's still people discriminated against on the basis of ethnicity, color, and gender, and so forth. But in the broadest sense, what society has gone as far as we have in terms of power? We were born in a revolution. It continues to this very day, even on the right with these crazy tea people. It's admirable in a sense, it's continual revolutions that continue. There's no guarantee, there's no necessity that those dramatic and interesting and fascinating revolutions that you studied from grammar school on, there's no necessity that that's a revolution on the left-hand side. That's Marx's insight. His argument in Capital was that the left-hand side of the equation, class exploitation, one of the conditions of existence is freedom. The freedom of people in the market. Now, this is Engels got this right. The freedom of the population to vote. So no society has gone as far as the United States in terms of guaranteeing those freedoms. No society probably has gone as far as the United States. It's a ruthless kind of class exploitation. That's the contradiction. That's why Marxism is difficult to teach. Okay. Ready now? Last step of this. I got 5 minutes, but it's okay. I'll pick it up. I'm going to redo numbers, give you numbers. Because numbers, I gave you words, I'm going to give you numbers. So if words don't appeal to you, we'll try the numbers. Okay? Suppose, I'm going to do the same thing. Suppose we have a quote for General Motors. I always like it. Suppose GM hires workers to produce cars. And it pays them $1 billion in wages. I really don't know what the numbers are, but it seems to be a hefty number. So the wages of the workers are $1 billion, all the workers, that's all workers together. And they're supposed to produce these cars. Let's assume that each of these workers go to work for 8 hours over the workday, they work 5 days, they work 40 hours. Okay. What do we have? In the United States, because of the non-class processes present, great revolutions that Mr. Engels quite correctly talked about, we have a freedom, which is the ability of workers to sell their capacity to work to anybody that will buy it. And by the buyers have the freedom to buy it. Marx calls that, once again, labor power. So labor power in capitalism is a commodity, bought and sold like any other. Not in serfdom, not in slavery. But capitalism, we have a new freedom. Took a revolution to get it, for power, which is that we have the capacity to sell. So the workers, General Motor workers and GE and all the rest of them, they get a value of their labor power which is equal to $1 billion. How do they get? They get the freedom to sell, and the capitalists have the freedom to buy. What do the workers do with this money? We've done this now several times, so I'm just going to do it again. The workers sell their capacity to produce, they get $1 billion in wages, they go out and buy stuff. They buy commodities. To do what? To reproduce themselves as workers, as human beings. So they go out and this is their wages, they go up. They take their wages and they go out and buy commodities. Things that are produced for sale. food, shelter, clothing, iPods, the whole shtick. They go out and buy all this stuff. Make life easy for myself. Suppose they go out and by the way, you go to the market, you don't steal, you gotta buy, so you gotta pay a price. So they go to the market, they buy commodities. Another way of saying that is they love apples. Well, let's assume that's the only thing they buy. That sustains them. Apples. They eat apples, they sleep apples, they drink apples, they wear apples, apples. They pay $0.50 for apples. They get paid $1 billion. How many apples do they buy to sustain themselves? Sorry? 2 billion. 2 billion apples. That's an answer for Whole Foods. This is called, by economists and by Marx, the real wage, the standard of living. The real bundle of goods and services to sustain the labor earners times the unit value, the price, equals this, $1 billion. Next. So this is the value. They buy commodities at their value. The market exchange, which is in this case $1 billion. I just broke it up into 2 parts. The price times the quantity. You asked me before, you got that now for the rest of your life? Did everybody got it? Okay. Suppose it took 4 hours to produce the apples. Another way of saying these apples, these apples are 2 billion apples, or worth $1 billion, could take 4 hours by all the apple producers to produce them. If that were the case, we could do the following. We could say, okay, in other words, it takes, say, 4 hours of labor to produce all these apples. Worth that amount. I'm just assuming in the apple orchards, it takes 4 hours of labor. We could say then that the workers in General Motors, they go to work, they work for 4 hours. Remember, they're working 8 hours altogether. They work for 4 hours. They get paid $1 billion of wages. That's the value of their labor power. We already did that. They go out. They can buy their apples. It took 4 hours to produce those apples. The necessary labor is 4 hours. Why? Because that's that's the quantum of labor, by my assumption. That's the amount of labor required to produce the consumer goods to sustain those laborers. Let me do it again. The necessary labor, which I had over here in your notes, the necessary labor in this example is 4 hours, it could be more, it could be less, I'm just taking a number. It's 4 hours to produce these wage goods to reproduce the person who's selling his or her labor power. That's what it takes to produce those commodities, those consumer goods. The worker then goes to work, produces $1 billion, and gets paid $1 billion. The worker doesn't go home. The worker is expected and ordered and disciplined and wants to work 4 more hours, let's say, 8 hours. That's the necessary labor. This is a surplus labor. What do you mean the worker wants to, is pushed to work? That's the logic again. There are politics, there are in economics, there's a culture in place which propels the worker to work not just 4 hours and go home, but rather to put in 8 hours, despite the fact that she is not going to get paid for these 4 extra hours. They're getting paid $1 billion for the 8-hour day. So you're going to ask yourself, What would be involved in the politics to make a person work surplus hours despite getting paid for the 4 hours? Well, if the person doesn't work 8, he, she will be fired. That's a law. That if you don't put in a full day, if you go home after 4 hours, you cover your wages, you're going to be fired. Fight is an interesting word. You're going to be burned. You're going to die. You'll have to be plausible. Let me finish one more before you break. There has to be a culture which says, I'm going to work a full day. That was given to you by mommy and daddy and your Aunt Louie, Aunt Sally and Uncle Louie. I'll see you on Tuesday.